Joining me right now to talk about a very interesting legal case, we have Brendan Berry, who's from the Cooley Law School. Brendan, thank you. Good to see you. And also Casey Ebsuri. Casey, thank you for stopping by.
Hey, Al.
All right, let's talk about this case. I'm going to let you explain it. It involved Facebook. And parents, you need to listen to this very, very carefully. Tell me about the case.
I'm going to tell you a very scary story. And it's a story about some parents who had a child who had a Facebook account. Mm-hmm. There was another account that was created allegedly by the child and a friend. They went into Photoshop or some picture-altering software and made an unflattering picture of another student.
Okay.
They said some ugly things about the person that were libelous, allegedly, and the family then got sued for what their child had done on Facebook.
Okay, now the problem on this was, Brendan, is that it was left on Facebook for about 11 months, and the parents were ultimately charged with, or whatever that means, because they didn't do enough to get rid of it, right?
Correct. And not only was the page still up 11 months after the parents found out about its existence, but it was still being used. In other words, the students who were running it were still friending other people and were still posting on the Facebook page, while their parents did nothing about it.
Right, and this was all before any legal action was ever taken. So does this apply to anybody who might have created, let's say, a false identity along the way?
Really, one thing to be clear about here is that the parents are not being accused of libel itself. They're being accused of negligent supervision of their children. So they're not exactly liable for anything that their child does wrong. The problem here is that they were on notice at a certain point that their child was doing something to hurt another, and there is a duty, courts have recognized for parents that when they know that their child is engaging in conduct that causes harm to another, to do everything they reasonably can to stop that from happening.
So Casey, do defamation and libel laws still apply to kids as well, or to parents? What?
Well, I think it's going to apply to anybody on Facebook, and probably the safest thing to do on Facebook is, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything. I mean, these phones have Facebook on it and people quickly chat away and make comments, but realize that you could be held accountable for what you're saying.
Are we
if
going
it's
to need to see
libelous.
more cases where people are held accountable for what they say? Because right now they say you're held accountable, but I mean, there is so much, pardon the expression, garbage that's out there. It's ridiculous.
Well, you know, families have been held accountable for the actions of children already in Florida, not specifically on Facebook, but in operation of motor vehicles, handling of firearms, making children go to school. So it's not really a new concept to Florida law.
So, Brent, what if the parents really don't know what's going on? And I would say there are probably a great percentage of parents that haven't the faintest ideas what their kids are putting on Snapshot and Snapchat and all these other websites.
That's why in the Georgia case that we're talking about, the court held that everything that happened before the parents were on notice of the Facebook page's existence is not something they can be held liable for. In other words, you as a parent, you're not a guarantor that everything your child does is appropriate and legal. But once you know that your child is doing something, again, that's harmful to somebody else, that's where the duty kicks in to do something about it. And you're only under the duty to do whatever any reasonable person would do. You don't have to be super parent, you just have to be a reasonable parent.
Okay, so a kind of a mixed bag from the court. So they dismissed the part of holding the parents responsible for what the kid had posted, but they held them responsible for not having their child take it down sooner. When you get a mixed case like this, now for us that aren't lawyers, we're sitting around going, holy smokes, there's so much gray area in here. How do you even know what's right and what's wrong?
Well, I think the takeaway for parents is if you're going to review Facebook content, then you may be held accountable for what you knew that was false or defamatory and didn't force the kid to take down. So I'm not sure the solution is to make sure that you know what your child's written on Facebook, because you might be held accountable for it personally. I'm not saying that Facebook is the Wild West anymore, but just be wise in what you're doing. And if your children have been raised correctly and they have principles and a sense of common decency, then perhaps they're not going to do things that are going to generate problems for the family if they find out about it.
This really didn't, talk about bullying. And I know we've got the Rebecca Sedgwick case. She's the Polk County girl who committed suicide because she said that she was being bullied, among other things. And any guidance from any of these cases that will help us in the future to know how courts are going to rule, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting case in the sense that it was kind of an end run around cyberbullying or bullying statutes.
Yeah.
Instead of going that route, they went for common law libel. The reason for that is that the statutes in most states, including Florida, they don't provide for damages. If this family wants damages from the other child's parents, the cyberbullying laws are directed at students and employees of schools.
Right.
So that doesn't provide for how you're going to get the other parents on the hook.
Okay.
So that's why they went this route.
So, Casey, I have a feeling that this is going to be like a lot of new things that we don't know what the intended consequences of it is, so that we're going to have to go along and literally stumble from case to case to case before we really have any super guidelines that everybody and their brother's uncle can read and understand and follow.
Spot on, Al. As recently as last night, I looked and tried to find anything in Florida law that was like this. And aside from liability for operation of motor vehicles, handling of firearms, and forcing kids to go to school, I don't see it in the statutes, and I don't see it in the case law. So it will be a developing area.
Because this is the Facebook case, I know that it's tough to hold Facebook, Twitter, and some of these other people responsible, but why? Why can't they be held responsible?
There's a federal law that applies when user-generated content is placed on the internet, and it was derived from the principle that the big content creators be the users and not the actual internet service providers. So they are in large part immune for statements made in user-generated content. And that is a really interesting point. If you, as a parent, find something and try to contact Facebook, first of all, find their number, or contact the large internet providers, you're not going to be able to get this taken down with a phone call. It's going to take a court order. And sometimes these kinds of lawsuits are the only avenue people have to get a court order that they can send to the lawyers for these big internet companies to say, this particular address contains defamatory content, a judge has ruled it, take it down. Now, I understand that the end shot of this case was that Facebook eventually did take it down.
Eventually. Because when you read the fine print with Facebook and Twitter, guess who owns all that stuff? They do. And they have it in the fine print. You put it on there, you don't own it any longer, they own it. And that's why it's been so difficult to get things taken down, which happens to a lot of people. They put on some wild pictures, maybe when they were in college and stuff, and now they're applying for a job with a law firm or someplace else like that. So the bottom line, warning to parents, give me a one-liner.
Know what your kids are putting on the internet, and the downside is once you know it, you have some responsibility to control it.
And as my mother used to say, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it. Gentlemen, thank you for stopping by. Very interesting case. Good
Thanks,
seeing
Al.
you. All right. Good
Thank
seeing
you.